South Africa's GDP has increased by 0.4%. However, some experts say this is just a drop in the ocean of what this country's economy needs. For an appraisal of GDP numbers released this week, I'm now joined by Chief Economist at Pan-African Investments and Research, Dr Iraj Abedian. Doctor, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this morning. So can you just explain what a GDP growth of 0.4% in the second quarter means for South Africa's economy, just in simple terms, and how these figures compare to previous economic performances?
Thank you very much, Katleva, for the invitation, and greetings to our viewers. I think the growth, the latest numbers show that there is a positive movement in the economy across the board. 7 out of 10 sectors show positive, although not impressive, growth from the last quarter. Remember last quarter, which was quarter one of this year, between January and March, growth, the economy was zero. In other words, there was no growth. Now, why is that not an impressive number of 0.4%, which is less than 0.5%? Our population growth, Katlego, in the country is roughly about 2%. To just stay put from an average standard of living, which means not losing, not gaining, but improving our standard of living on average, we need a minimum growth every year of about 2%. If you want to improve, if you want to create new jobs, you want to create new tax revenues, new opportunities, then that has to be on a sustainable basis above 2%, ideally 3.5% to 4%, which means then every 5 years we'll see a tangible improvement in the standard of living. We see a better tax base, a better space for government to have its finances and service delivery financed. At the moment, and for the past 15 years, our economy has been going really into what is, in the word of the president, as you broadcast, is the anemic performance. This puts us on a back foot, which means on a quarterly basis, we're going backwards instead of going forwards. We are not stagnant, we're going backwards. And we have been going backwards for about 10 years, which means we have lost a generation of our young population whose future has been compromised. Now, we have at the moment, and hopefully this growth numbers shows a bit of green shoot, as they say, we have a set of favorable variables or factors in our favor. We have had our elections, and generally, locally, internationally, the investment community's confidence is much more positive and favorable than before. We have inflation coming down globally, and in South Africa, we see prices of petrol coming down quite materially today. And all of that means that our inflation is now going to go where the Reserve Bank regards it as safe enough to cut the interest rates at least 0.5% and keep going for the next 2 years. We have a government that's committing itself, and we have to see that they can prove themselves. They're committing themselves to getting the economy back on track. All of that means it may be, and I'm very cautious, it may be a turning point from a very, very low base. And these numbers are, in that context, promising, but we have a long hill to climb.
And in that promising long hill to climb, how does this growth rate just impact ordinary South Africans in terms of job creation and income level increase, cost of living, and just the overall economic opportunities?
That's a very critical and central question to ask. This growth becomes relevant for the lived reality of our unemployed and our poor only if it's based on new enterprises, not because prices have gone up or because Eskom is not producing more electricity and charging us more and making more profit and showing growth. That's not what we want. We want new activities, we want new investments, we want new jobs to be created. And if we want to answer your question, then I'll go back to my previous suggestion that we need to reconfigure our macroeconomy so that this economy can grow at 3.5% to 4%. At that point, it can only come about if new investments are placed, if new jobs are created, new revenue base for the nation as well as for government are generated. At the level of 0.5% and 1%, all that it means that the existing businesses, existing jobs are creating better value. For example, a mine, if the price of gold and platinum and iron ore goes up, of course, they've gone the wrong way this time. But if they go up, you'll see growth. But that growth doesn't mean that new jobs are created. That does not mean necessarily that there are new activities on a sustainable basis put into the economy so that jobs and people's lives can be affected. So I think we need to separate growth at 2% as opposed to growth of 4 and 5 and 6%. The minute that we go above 2%, then you'll see a change in level of jobs. You'll see a change in the level of disposable income of families. And all of that, we have to really reconfigure our economy. At the moment, there's a lot of talk and a lot of promise, but there isn't about or a wave of new activities, new enterprises, so that new jobs can be created.
So then which sectors, Doc, would you say have contributed the most to this growth, be it a 0.4%? And what implications does this have for industry performance?
Yeah, as we expected, because we had a good 3-4 months of no load shedding, electricity and power sector more broadly was the best performer from a low base. We have finance sector is the next best performing. We have manufacturing. So these are sectors that have performed above 1%. And remember how the bar has fallen so low that when we talk about 1%, they are the best performers. So the 7 sectors, the top performing is electricity and water, logistics. The worst performing, and there are 3 of them, at the bottom is transport. Remember, we had all kinds of logistical problems. We had the strikes in the trucking sector. Basically, during the second quarter of our year, this year, between April to June, and the numbers relate to that quarter, you had the transport and logistics sector were in trouble. So they've dipped. They've gone minus 2%, more than 2%. Then you have agriculture. Again, weather conditions, KZN, weather and other areas, Limpopo had problems. So I think that's the second worst performing. And then you had mining. We are now in a global cycle of low commodity prices. And that means our mining sector didn't perform partly because of that and partly because Transnet, rail and ports are not up to standard. So I think these are the best and worst performers. Broadly, because 7 out of 10 sectors perform, the economy overall is in a good shape to grow, but it needs a lot of support, a lot of systemic new investments done properly in the right strategic sectors, such as ports, railways, urban infrastructure, which affects the living conditions of people and is labor intensive in terms of job creation.
So, Doc, I mean, South Africa is a global player, especially on the economic fields. How does this growth in the second quarter align just with the broader regional or global economic trends? And what does it suggest about us as a country in terms of the position that we're in the international marketplace?
Well, in the international setting or comparison, Katleho, which is a very important point, we must begin on the continent. South Africa is one of the worst performing on the continent of Africa, which is, again, as the biggest economy, most sophisticated and most industrialized, that is an embarrassing position to be in. We are pulling the SADC area down. We are pulling the continent's growth and prosperity down. So South Africa, in that context, is not in a good position. If we then compare it with the so-called emerging economies that are our peer base of comparison, for example, if we compare it with India. India is an emerging economy, South Africa is an emerging economy. India is now the top performing. Its growth is now taken over or overtaken China's and is likely to stay. If we go Latin America, looking at countries like Brazil and Peru, and they, again, they are growing at 3-4 times what we are growing. Not because they are doing necessarily so well, but because we're doing so badly. So I think in global comparison, we are not in a good position. And in the continental position, we are not in a good position. And in the subcontinental, meaning SADC, we are even in the worst situation because we are the worst performer.